Inside Louisiana Death Row Transfer, secrets behind the silent moves. The night the prison went silent. It was 2:47 a.m. at the Louisiana State Penitentiary, better known as Angola. The air was heavy, still, almost unnatural. Even the guards whispered. On that night, the sound of engines broke through the darkness. 3 unmarked white buses, headlights dimmed, rolled quietly through the back gates. No sirens. No shouting. No warnings. Inside those buses sat some of Louisiana's most dangerous men who hadn't seen freedom in decades. Their wrists were cuffed, ankles chained, eyes wide open. And yet, no one outside those walls knew they were being moved. Not their families. Not their lawyers. Not even the local news. The guards on duty that night were told one thing. Don't ask questions. Just follow the list. But something about that list didn't make sense. One of the names wasn't supposed to be there. That's when a correctional officer named Derrick Lawson realized this wasn't a routine transfer. This was something else. Something secret. Something the prison didn't want anyone to find out. What was so dangerous that the state had to move death row inmates in the middle of the night, under full secrecy. The order no one saw coming. A week earlier, everything had been normal, or at least as normal as death row gets. Louisiana's death row wing sat in a remote corner of Angola Prison, isolated, silent, and locked down 23 hours a day. It was built decades ago and the walls showed it. Cracks ran through the floor. Paint peeled from the ceiling. The electric chairs and execution chambers hadn't been used in years. But that changed on a Monday morning. A memo appeared on the warden's desk, marked Classified Internal, Immediate Transfer, High-Risk Inmates. The document was short. No explanation. No press release. Just one instruction. Move all death row inmates to undisclosed facilities within the week. No one knew who signed it. The signature was smudged, the origin line blacked out. When word reached the guards, rumors spread fast. Some said the old death row building was shutting down. Others believed it had something to do with an upcoming federal inspection. But Derrick Lawson, who'd worked in the prison for 17 years, wasn't buying any of it. He'd seen transfers before. They were loud, messy, and public. But this time, they were being told to move inmates at night, with no record, no family notifications, and no media coverage. When Lawson asked his captain what was going on, the answer was chilling. You didn't hear about it. You didn't see it. Just do your job. The next few nights, Lawson began to notice small changes, subtle but unsettling. Security cameras in certain hallways went dark for maintenance. New faces appeared among the guards, men who didn't wear name tags. And a convoy of unmarked vehicles was parked behind the east wall, far from the usual transfer gates. That's when Derrick started keeping notes. Dates. License plates. Anything that looked unusual. Because something about this transfer felt wrong. By Wednesday, half the death row wing had been emptied. Cell doors that had been locked for decades now stood open. And the men who once filled them, killers, gang leaders, lifers, were simply gone. But gone where? Even the prison's public information office claimed they had no record of any transfers that week. And then one night later, the rest were taken too. The convoy that vanished. It was supposed to be a simple midnight transfer. In, out, no noise. But what happened that night still doesn't add up. Derrick Lawson was stationed at Gate 9, the eastern exit of Angola. The area was quiet, only lit by a single floodlight. From his booth, he could see the row of buses lined up in the dark, their engines rumbling softly. Each bus had 2 escort SUVs, blacked out, with state plates but no markings. At 2:30 a.m., the call came through his radio. Begin movement. Lock down outer perimeters. The gates slid open with a metallic groan. That was the moment Derrick noticed something strange. The buses had no visible DOC, Department of Corrections, identifiers. No serial numbers, no decals. Just blank, white paint. He approached one of the outside escorts and asked, "Where are they headed?" The driver, a man he didn't recognize, gave a half smile and said, "You didn't hear it from me, officer, but this isn't your usual death row run. Before Derrick could ask more, the man closed the window and the convoy started rolling forward. The massive gates shut behind them, sealing the prison off from the world again. The next morning, there were no transfer logs. No reports filed. Even the inmate database showed the same message next to each missing name. Record unavailable in transit. Lawson checked with Central Records in Baton Rouge, but they claimed they'd never received a notice of transfer. That's when the whispers started spreading across the correctional network. One rumor said the inmates were being sent to a new high-security facility that hadn't been made public yet. Another claimed they were going to Mississippi under a state-sharing agreement. And one theory, the one Derrick couldn't shake, said the men weren't being moved at all, but removed. That afternoon, Lawson walked into the now-empty death row block. The silence was deafening. Cells that once echoed with voices were now stripped bare. Mattresses gone, nameplates removed, even personal belongings confiscated. But then he saw something. On the floor, half hidden under a pile of debris, was a small torn envelope. Inside, the letter. It was written in shaky handwriting, from one of the inmates, Marcus LeBlanc, who'd been on death row for 18 years. If anyone finds this, tell my sister I'm not being moved to Baton Rouge. They said we're going to Facility 12. But there is no Facility 12 on the map. Please, don't forget about us. Lawson froze. He knew every facility number in the Louisiana DOC system. And he was right, there was no Facility 12. That night, he decided to dig deeper. He went through internal dispatch logs, hoping to trace the convoy's route. Most entries were routine, food deliveries, maintenance trucks, etc. But between 2:30 a.m. and 4:15 a.m., the entire system went blank. Every camera feed, every digital timestamp, erased. Someone didn't just want secrecy. They wanted the transfer invisible. A week later, a storm swept through Louisiana. Power lines went down, communications jammed, and that's when Lawson got the call that would change everything. A voice on the other end whispered, "They didn't make it to Baton Rouge. None of them did." The Lost Convoy. The call came from a blocked number. Derrick hesitated before answering, but something in his gut told him to pick it up. The voice was low, almost drowned by static. They didn't make it to Baton Rouge. None of them did. Then the line went dead. He tried calling back, but there was nothing, no signal, no trace. Still, those words echoed in his head all night. If the convoy never reached Baton Rouge, then where were they? By morning, the prison was pretending like nothing happened. The warden walked the halls with calm confidence, giving brief orders, avoiding eye contact. But Derrick noticed his office door was locked, something that never happened before. He knew this wasn't just some clerical mix-up. He'd been part of the Louisiana DOC long enough to recognize when the truth was being buried. So he did what most wouldn't dare, he started asking questions. He called in a favor from a friend in the Department of Public Safety's logistics unit, someone who tracked prison transport vehicles. When he read the convoy registration numbers, his friend paused for a long time and said, "Derrick, I don't have those numbers in my system. They don't exist." That's when the dread hit him. The buses that left Angola weren't official state property. They weren't even registered. Someone had used ghost vehicles, untraceable, unlogged, and off the books. Later that week, a new rumor started circulating among staff. A wreck had occurred somewhere near the Atchafalaya Basin, a massive stretch of swampland that divides Louisiana. No public report, no police follow-up, just quiet cleanup by state contractors. No one knew if the convoy was involved, but the timeline matched perfectly. When Derrick asked for permission to visit the basin under the pretense of security follow-up, his request was denied immediately. The denial letter came straight from Baton Rouge, stamped, "Restricted movement, security clearance required." He wasn't supposed to go. But curiosity had already turned into obsession. That weekend, he drove himself. No uniform, no badge, just a man looking for answers. The road through Atchafalaya was long and narrow, surrounded by thick fog and the sound of insects humming. When he reached mile marker 214, something caught his eye, deep tire grooves cutting into the soft mud, leading off the main road and into the swamp. He parked and followed the trail with a flashlight. A few hundred yards in, he found it, a charred metal fragment, half buried in the dirt. When he cleaned it off, 3 faint letters appeared under the soot. LSP, Louisiana State Penitentiary. He wasn't imagining it. One of the Angola transfer buses had been here. The ground was scorched, like something had burned fast and hot. There were no official signs, no police tape, but the smell of diesel still hung in the air. Then, just as Derrick was taking photos with his phone, headlights appeared from the distance. A black SUV slowed to a crawl behind him, stopping only a few feet away. The window rolled down. A man in a plain black suit stared at him, silent. Then said calmly, "You shouldn't be here, officer. Go home." Derrick's heart pounded. He slipped the metal fragment into his pocket and left, but he knew he'd just crossed a line. That night, he checked the DOC internal server again. Every file related to the death row transfer had vanished. And when he opened his locker the next morning, his logbook, the one where he'd recorded every strange event, was gone too. Someone was watching him. And worse, they knew what he'd found. But the truth had already started to leak beyond the walls. A local journalist from Baton Rouge named Claire Henderson had been asking questions too, about missing inmates and ghost transports. Derrick didn't know her yet, but their paths were about to cross. And when they did, the story would explode. The reporter and the hidden facility. The message arrived 2 days later, slipped under Derrick's front door in a plain envelope. Inside was a folded note and a business card. The note read, "You're not the only one looking. Meet me where the river bends. Midnight." The card was from Claire Henderson, investigative reporter, Baton Rouge Sentinel. Derrick hesitated for hours before deciding to go. He knew meeting an outsider could cost him his job, maybe worse. But at this point, the silence inside Angola was louder than any warning. At midnight, he parked near an old dock off the Mississippi River. The air was cold, the fog thick enough to blur the trees. A figure appeared near the end of the dock, holding a flashlight. "Officer Lawson?" she asked softly. He nodded. "I've been following this transfer for weeks," Claire said. "My contact inside Baton Rouge Corrections leaked a redacted memo. It mentioned something called Facility 12B. She pulled out a folder filled with papers and satellite photos. On one of the images, Derrick spotted something strange, a fenced compound deep in the marshlands, about 50 miles from Angola. No roads leading in, no coordinates listed on any map. Just a cleared square of land surrounded by forest. "Looks like a holding site," Claire explained. "But it's not registered under the state or federal system. That means someone's running it off the books." Derrick's heart dropped. Facility 12, it was real. The same name Marcus LeBlanc had scribbled in that note before disappearing. Claire continued, flipping to another page. This memo was flagged under Emergency Relocation Protocol. It's used when a prison is deemed unstable or if inmates pose a national threat. But there's something odd. The author is listed as Internal Oversight, Division 9. There's no Division 9 in the Department of Corrections. Derrick looked over the pages. Each one had heavy black bars where the names should have been. But near the bottom of one document, barely visible, was a name he recognized, Warden Frank Dillard. His own warden. The truth started to fit together like broken glass. This wasn't just a secret transfer. It was a controlled removal, ordered, erased, and hidden by the same people who claimed it never happened. Claire leaned closer, lowering her voice. "I've spoken to 3 families of the missing inmates. They all got letters from the DOC saying their relatives were relocated for safety. But none of them have heard a word since. One family tried to send money through the commissary. The payment bounced back with a note that said, 'Inmate not found.'" Derrick clenched his jaw. He remembered Marcus, his calm voice, his quiet faith, the way he always said, "They can take my life, but they can't erase me." And now, he was gone. Erased. Claire handed him a flash drive. "This contains satellite records from the night of the transfer. The timestamps show the convoy leaving Angola, and then, nothing. The last trace is near the Atchafalaya Basin. After that, it's as if they vanished into thin air." Derrick sighed. "I was there. I saw the tracks. One of those buses burned." Claire's eyes widened. You have proof? He pulled out the scorched fragment marked LSP from his jacket. Her breath caught. That's from the transport vehicle. Before she could say more, headlights cut through the fog, two black SUVs pulling up fast. Claire killed her flashlight instantly. Both ducked behind a pile of crates as the SUVs parked. Men in tactical uniforms stepped out, no markings, just earpieces and black gloves. One of them scanned the dock with a flashlight. Another muttered, "Command says the officer's been talking. We find him tonight." Derrick's pulse raced. He turned to Claire. "They're not supposed to know about you." "They shouldn't," she whispered back, eyes wide. "They must have tapped your phone." The men searched for nearly 10 minutes before driving off. When the sound of the engines faded, Claire whispered, "They know we're close." He nodded. "And that means whatever they're hiding inside Facility 12, it's bigger than we thought." As they packed up to leave, Claire handed Derrick a burner phone. "Don't go back to Angola yet. Let me dig through the federal side. If this crosses into national jurisdiction, someone's funding it, and we can trace the money." Derrick agreed, but deep down he knew. If people were willing to erase death row inmates, they wouldn't hesitate to erase him too. That night, as he drove back through the empty highway, he passed a road sign he'd never noticed before. It was old, rusted, barely readable. But the letters still glowed faintly in the headlights. Facility 12, Restricted Zone. He stopped the car, took one long look at the sign, and whispered to himself, "It's real." Facility 12. The sign shouldn't have been there. It wasn't listed on any map, GPS, or government record, yet it stood like a ghost from another world. Facility 12, Restricted Zone. No arrows. No directions. Just a warning. Derrick sat in his car for a long moment, his engine idling in the darkness. Rain began to fall, slow at first, then harder, tapping against the windshield like impatient fingers. He felt that same pull he'd felt since the night of the transfer, that voice in the back of his mind saying, "Don't look away." He took out his phone and texted Claire the coordinates. "I found it." Within minutes, she replied. "Don't go in yet. Wait for me. I'm 40 minutes out." But Derrick couldn't wait. Not after everything he'd seen, the missing men, the erased logs, the burned buses. He had to know what Facility 12 really was. He drove past the sign and onto a narrow dirt road, lined by swamp trees and fog that seemed to glow in his headlights. The deeper he went, the quieter it became, even the crickets had stopped. After 10 minutes, he saw it, a chain-link fence topped with razor wire, stretching as far as he could see. At the center, a single gate, guarded by 2 floodlights and a security booth. He cut his engine and watched through binoculars. There were guards, at least 4, wearing tactical gear but no DOC patches. Their uniforms were blank. Their vehicles were black, unmarked. Then he noticed something even stranger. Every few minutes, a truck rolled through the gate carrying sealed metal crates, stamped only with one word, "BIO mate." Not food. Not supplies. Something else. Derrick grabbed his flashlight and crept along the outer fence until he reached a section partially collapsed into the mud. He slipped through, crouching low. The smell of disinfectant filled the air, harsh and sterile, like a hospital that never stopped cleaning. He moved closer until he could see the main building, gray concrete, no windows, just vents and blinking red lights. The place looked less like a prison and more like a research facility. Suddenly, a voice crackled over a loudspeaker. "Sector 3 inbound. Prepare containment." Containment? What were they containing out here? Derrick ducked behind a stack of barrels as 2 guards passed by, dragging a cart covered by a thick tarp. A faint clinking sound came from underneath, like chains hitting metal. One of the guards said, "They said this batch came straight from Angola. Poor bastards still think it's a transfer." The other laughed. "Transfer to nowhere." Derrick's stomach twisted. He'd heard enough. He turned back toward the fence, but then froze. Behind the main building, under a flickering light, he saw a row of concrete doors, each marked with a number, 1 through 12. But only one had its light on, door 12. He slipped closer, his boots sinking into the mud. Through a small glass slit in the door, he peered inside. And there, in the dim light, he saw what looked like a line of metal cages. Inside one of them, a man sat perfectly still, staring straight ahead. Even from that distance, Derrick recognized the face. Marcus LeBlanc. Alive. Eyes wide. But breathing. Derrick's heart pounded. He whispered, "Marcus?" under his breath. As if hearing it, Marcus slowly turned his head toward the door. Their eyes met for half a second, and then the lights inside the room went dark. Suddenly, alarms blared. Red lights flashed across the perimeter. Intruder alert. North sector breach. Derrick sprinted toward the fence, sliding through the same gap he'd entered. Bullets hit the mud near his feet as the floodlights swept the area. He dove into the swamp water and crawled through the reeds, heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. Behind him, a voice on the loudspeaker yelled, "Lockdown Protocol 12. Repeat, Protocol 12. By the time he reached his car, Claire had arrived. Her headlights cut through the rain, and she gasped when she saw his soaked uniform. "Derrick, what happened?" He slammed the door behind him, breathing hard. "I saw them. They're alive." "Marcus, he's in there." Claire froze. "Alive? You mean?" "Yes." "They didn't transfer them to another prison. They hid them. Whatever Facility 12 is, it's where they send people to disappear." She looked at him, eyes wide with fear. "Then we have to tell someone. We need proof." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I recorded everything." But when he opened the camera app, the screen glitched, then turned black. Files corrupted. Every video, every photo, gone. He stared at the screen in disbelief. "They wiped it," he whispered. "They wiped my phone." Claire's hands trembled. "Then we need to go public before they wipe us too." As they sped off into the night, a drone lifted silently above Facility 12, tracking their car down the narrow road. And inside the command center, a voice spoke through an intercom. "Lawson has seen too much. Mark him as compromised." The camera zoomed in on their license plate. Then, just before the feed cut out, the same word appeared on the monitor in red. "Facility 13, activation approved." The hunt begins. The rain hadn't stopped by dawn. It followed them like a shadow, heavy, relentless, almost deliberate. By the time Derrick and Claire reached the outskirts of Baton Rouge, the roads were slick and empty, reflecting the orange glow of streetlights like glass. They pulled into a rundown motel off Highway 61. The neon sign flickered between vacancy and can't see, the V long dead. Inside, the air smelled of bleach and damp carpet. Claire set up her laptop on the motel table while Derrick sat on the edge of the bed, still shaking. He couldn't get the image of Marcus out of his mind, that stare through the glass, those eyes that said "help me" without words. Claire's fingers tapped rapidly across the keyboard. She was pulling up encrypted archives, cross-referencing government contracts, DOC expenditures, anything with the keywords Facility 12, Division 9, or Relocation Protocol. "Look at this," she muttered. "A private security firm called Ardent Systems has been receiving millions in state contracts for correctional infrastructure upgrades. But there's no record of what those upgrades actually are." Derrick leaned over her shoulder. "Ardent Systems? Never heard of them." "They're not supposed to be heard of," she replied. "They're a ghost contractor, the kind used when the government wants to keep its hands clean. Guess who their parent company is?" She turned the screen toward him. In bold letters, it read, "Federal Correctional Technologies Division, FCTD, a subsidiary of MedTech Research Group." Derrick frowned. "MedTech? They make medical equipment." Claire nodded slowly. "Exactly. But look at this. 2 years ago, they patented something called Cognitive Compliance Monitoring Device. It's a medical term, but in corrections that translates to neural behavior tracking." He froze. "You're saying they're experimenting on inmates?" "I'm saying," she whispered, "Facility 12 isn't just a prison. It's a lab." The room fell silent except for the hum of the motel air conditioner. Derrick stood, pacing, rubbing his face. "They can't do that. These are still human beings." Claire interrupted him. Not if the paperwork says otherwise. I found a classified bill draft that was shelved last year. It proposed redefining high-risk capital inmates as state assets under federal security control. He stopped cold. They turned people into property. Before he could respond, a low rumble passed outside, a black SUV idling at the edge of the parking lot. Claire quickly shut her laptop. The vehicle lights turned off, but the silhouette of two men could be seen through the rain, facing their room. Derrick whispered, "We've been tracked." She nodded. "They found us faster than I thought." He peeked through the blinds just as one of the men raised something to his ear, an earpiece. Then, from across the lot, the motel clerk opened the door with a confused look, and one of the agents flashed a badge. Within seconds, the clerk pointed toward their room. "Back door. Now," Claire hissed. They grabbed the laptop, her files, and ran through the bathroom window into the alley behind the motel. As they ducked behind a dumpster, the sound of the front door bursting open echoed through the walls. "Lawson! Henderson! Step out with your hands up." But these weren't cops. Their voices were calm, professional, the tone of people who didn't need to make arrests. People who made problems disappear. Claire pointed to a rusty pickup truck parked behind the fence. "Hotwire it," she said. Derrick hesitated. "You know how to do that?" She gave a tight grin. "I've covered enough protest raids to learn a few tricks." Within seconds, the truck roared to life. They sped off into the storm, headlights off, as two SUVs peeled out of the parking lot behind them. Claire shouted over the wind, "Where are we going?" Derrick clenched the wheel. "Someplace they won't expect." They drove for hours through back roads until they reached a small abandoned church near St. Francisville, an old wooden structure sinking into the swamp. Derrick had gone there once during a field operation years ago. No electricity, no cameras, no cell signal. Inside, they collapsed in exhaustion. Claire set up her laptop using an offline power bank and pulled out a second flash drive, one she hadn't told Derrick about. "This one came from a whistleblower inside the DOC," she said quietly. "They sent it to me 2 weeks ago but said I wouldn't understand it until I met you." She opened the files, maps, diagrams, and internal memos stamped, Division 9, Internal Oversight. The last page showed an image of a massive underground structure labeled Facility 12B, Cognitive Control Phase 2, Active. Underneath was a list of inmate ID numbers, every single one from Angola's death row. Next to each name, a final column read only one word, ongoing. Derrick whispered, "They're still alive. And they're doing something to them." Claire nodded, her face pale. "And if we don't stop it, they'll keep doing it, across every state." Outside, the sound of helicopters began to echo faintly in the distance. Derrick looked up through the broken roof, rain dripping down his face. "They're not giving up, are they?" Claire shook her head. "No. But neither are we." She pulled out a small encrypted phone and said, "There's one person who might help us, but he's not exactly legal." And that's when Derrick realized, to expose the truth about Facility 12, they'd have to go underground. Literally. The man called Echo. The rain had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. It was the kind of silence that pressed against your ears, heavy, unnatural, as if the swamp itself was listening. Claire checked her watch. He said midnight. They were still inside the old church, lit only by the glow of her laptop screen. Derrick stood by the doorway, scanning the tree line. His nerves were shot, his hand never leaving the small revolver he kept tucked in his waistband, the one thing he hadn't turned in after leaving Angola. At exactly midnight, a faint sound broke the stillness. A soft hum, then the crackle of a nearby generator. Claire turned toward the sound and whispered, "He's here." A figure stepped out from the shadows of the swamp. Tall, lean, wearing a hooded raincoat and carrying a small case. When he lifted his head, the dim light revealed a pale face lined with fatigue, but his eyes were alert, sharp, like someone who hadn't slept in days. "Your Echo?" Derrick asked. The man gave a half smile. "You could say that, but officially I don't exist." His voice was calm, quiet, the kind of voice that made you lean in just to catch every word. Echo set down the case on the altar and opened it. Inside were several flash drives, old photos, and what looked like a broken DOC security badge. "I used to work inside," he said. "Facility 12, Maintenance Division. At least, that's what they told us it was. But maintenance doesn't require biometric scanners or daily blood checks." He looked at Derrick. "You were there the night they moved them, weren't you?" Derrick nodded slowly. "I saw the buses. I saw Marcus LeBlanc. He's alive." Echo's face darkened. "Then he's part of the trials." Claire leaned forward. "Trials? What kind of trials?" Echo sighed, pulling out a photo from the case. It showed a sterile white room, bright lights, stainless steel walls, and several inmates strapped into chairs, their heads connected to thin cables running into a console. A man in a lab coat stood in the background, his face blurred. "They call it cognitive reconditioning. The idea is to suppress aggression, remove defiance, rewire thought patterns, make inmates safe for society. But the real purpose," he trailed off, pulling up another image, "is control." This time, the photo showed a guard sitting across from an inmate. The inmate's eyes were glazed over, his posture rigid, like a puppet on invisible strings. Echo tapped the picture. "He's awake. But he's not himself anymore. They turned him into a command unit. He follows verbal triggers. That's what Facility 12 does." Derrick felt his chest tighten. "You mean they're experimenting on death row inmates, using them as test subjects?" Echo nodded grimly. "Under federal cover. Every transfer death row case in Louisiana goes to 12. They vanish from the DOC system because they're reclassified as experimental assets. The state signs them off as deceased. But they're not dead. They're being erased and repurposed." Claire swallowed hard. "How many people?" 82 so far, Echo said. "But they're expanding. Facility 13 is already under construction near Lake Charles." Derrick stepped back, trying to process. "But why would they do this?" Echo glanced at him, his expression tired but firm. "Because control is cheaper than justice. They're trying to create inmates who never fight back, never sue, never resist orders. And if it works in prisons," he paused, "they'll use it everywhere, detention centers, military bases, even protests." Claire's voice shook. "You have proof?" Echo slid a flash drive across the table. "Everything's on there. Employee rosters, financial trails, video footage. But it's encrypted with a 3-part key, one of which is still inside the facility." "So you're saying," Derrick said slowly, "if we want to expose them, we have to go back inside?" Echo nodded. "You can't shut it down from the outside. The only way is to breach their main server room, underground level 3. I can get you in, but you'll only have one shot before they realize you're there." Claire crossed her arms. "That place is crawling with armed guards. You expect us to just walk in?" "Not walk," Echo said. "Go through the old flood tunnels beneath the swamp. Facility 12 was built over a decommissioned drainage system from the 1950s. Half the staff doesn't even know it's there." He unrolled an old blueprint across the altar. Faded lines, handwritten coordinates, and an access hatch marked subsection D. "That's your entry point," Echo continued. "Get to the lower levels, find the server room, extract the data. Once you have it, I'll broadcast it through independent channels. If the public sees what's going on inside 12, it's over." Derrick stared at the map. It was crazy. It was suicidal. But he'd seen Marcus, and he couldn't walk away now. "All right," he said finally. "We do it." Echo nodded once, then handed him a small black device. "A frequency scrambler. It'll buy you a few minutes of silence before their systems lock back in." Claire looked between them. "When do we move?" Echo glanced at his watch. "Tomorrow night. 0200 hours. They change shifts at exactly 2:05. You'll have a 4-minute blind window." Then, as he packed up his case, he added quietly, "And Lawson, if you see Marcus again, don't speak to him. They've programmed the subjects to react to voice recognition. One wrong word and he'll turn on you." Derrick nodded grimly, the weight of that warning sinking deep. Outside, thunder rumbled again in the distance, Not from a storm, but from helicopters circling miles away, scanning the swamps. Claire whispered, "They're getting closer." Echo looked at both of them, then at the flickering candle on the altar. "Then we don't have much time." Beneath the swamp, the next night came heavy and slow. The air over the Louisiana swamps was thick as syrup, humid, still, and full of sound. Cicadas screamed in the trees. Water rippled under the faint orange glow of the moon. And somewhere out there, hidden under miles of mud and cypress roots, was Facility 12. Derrick, Claire, and Echo moved quietly through the marsh, their boots sinking into the wet earth. The plan was simple on paper: follow the old drainage tunnels marked on the blueprint, break in, extract the data, and get out before the systems rebooted. But nothing about this felt simple now. 2 minutes to shift change, Echo whispered, checking his watch. He led them to a half-buried concrete hatch, almost invisible under years of moss and swamp water. It was old, maybe from the 1950s flood control system Echo had mentioned. Derrick brushed away the mud and found the faded lettering on the lid. Section D, Maintenance. Echo pulled a small magnetic tool from his pack, attached it to the rusted lock, and twisted. The metal groaned, echoing through the trees. "Once we're in," he said, "there's no turning back. You trip one sensor, they'll seal the tunnels." Claire took a deep breath. "Then let's not trip one." With a final click, the hatch opened. A wave of cold, stale air rushed out, the smell of metal, oil, and something faintly chemical. They climbed down the narrow ladder into the dark, the only light coming from Echo's dim red headlamp. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling. The sound of their footsteps sloshing through the tunnel was deafening in the silence. Derrick whispered, "You said this used to drain into the river?" Echo nodded. "Until they built Facility 12 right on top of it. The lower levels were converted into maintenance corridors. If we're lucky, we'll come up near sublevel C, close to the server wing." They moved in silence for nearly 10 minutes, the tunnel stretching endlessly forward. Then they reached a junction where an old sign hung crooked from the wall. Pressurized ducts. Echo pointed left. "That's the direction of the main power line." He handed Derrick a small device. "This will cut their motion sensors for about 90 seconds. After that, the system will reboot automatically." Derrick nodded, gripping it tight. They crept down the corridor until a faint hum began to vibrate through the floor. The tunnel widened into a metal chamber, walls lined with pipes and flickering lights. Echo stopped suddenly, raising his hand. "Wait, someone's here." Voices echoed faintly from the other side of a steel door. 2 guards. Their words were muffled, but Derrick could make out pieces of the conversation. "Shift's quiet tonight. Yeah. Heard Division 9's people are back tomorrow. Running another sync test." "Another one?" "Thought the last batch fried half the subjects." "Doesn't matter. They're not supposed to think anyway." Claire's face went pale. Echo gestured for silence, then placed a small mirror under the door gap. The reflection showed the guards sitting in front of monitors, bored, unarmed except for stun rifles. He motioned to Derrick. "Follow my lead." Echo triggered the sensor jammer. The overhead lights flickered, once, twice, then went out completely. In the confusion, the door slid open, and within seconds, both guards were unconscious on the floor. Derrick stared, half shocked. "You took them out that fast?" Echo smirked. "Maintenance division, remember?" They moved past the control room and into a long glass corridor. For the first time, Facility 12 stretched out in front of them, silent, sterile, and alive with low mechanical hums. Beyond the glass, through observation windows, Derrick could see shapes moving. Not guards. Not workers. People, men in jumpsuits, sitting in chairs, motionless, heads wired to machines. Their eyes were open, but there was nothing behind them. Just emptiness. Claire raised her camera, hand trembling. "Oh my God." Echo whispered, "That's Phase 1, baseline control. They strip away emotion first. Makes the rest easier." Derrick stepped closer to the glass and froze. One of the men inside turned his head slowly toward him. Their eyes met for half a second. And in that instant, Derrick saw recognition. Marcus LeBlanc. He looked thinner now, but still alive. Wires ran across his neck like veins of silver. When he saw Derrick, his mouth twitched as if trying to speak, but no sound came out. Then an alarm tone chirped softly overhead. Warning, sensor interruption detected. Move! Cohist. They sprinted down the corridor toward the server wing. Lights flashed red. Containment breach, an automated voice repeated. Echo slammed the scrambler onto a control panel. Sparks flew. The alarms cut off abruptly. They ducked into the server room, rows of humming machines filling the air with static. Claire connected her laptop to the main port while Echo plugged in the flash drive. Lines of code flickered across the screen. Download in progress, she said, voice trembling. 2 minutes. Derrick kept watch at the door. Footsteps thundered somewhere down the hall, guards shouting orders. Through the glass, he saw Marcus again, standing now, staring straight at him. Then the lights dimmed, and the intercom crackled. Subject number 001 activated. Lockdown authorized. Echo's eyes widened. They're waking them up. What do you mean waking them up? Derrick shouted. Those men aren't asleep. They're programmed to respond to external intrusion. You triggered their defense protocol. Suddenly, Marcus slammed his hands against the glass. It didn't break, but the sound was enough to send chills down Derrick's spine. His expression was blank, but his lips moved slowly, forming words Derrick couldn't hear. Claire whispered, "He's trying to say something." Then the download completed with a soft beep. "Done," she yelled. Echo yanked the drive free. "We have to go, now." They sprinted back toward the tunnels as red lights bathed the corridor. Behind them, the sound of shattering glass echoed like thunder. Claire looked back just long enough to see figures stepping out of their cages, unsteady, slow, but moving. Derrick grabbed her arm. "Don't look back." They dove into the hatch just as the automated doors sealed shut behind them. The echo of alarms followed them into the dark tunnel. When they finally reached the surface, soaked in swamp water and shaking, Claire clutched the flash drive to her chest. Derrick looked back toward the forest, the ground rumbling faintly under his boots. Echo muttered, "They'll bury this place before morning." Claire asked, "Then what do we do now?" Echo looked up at the faint light on the horizon, dawn creeping in. "We show the world what's really happening in Louisiana." The leak that never was. The sun rose like fire over the Louisiana swamps, cutting through the fog and steam. But for Derrick, Claire, and Echo, it didn't feel like dawn. It felt like the beginning of something darker. They'd made it out alive. Barely. Now they sat in an abandoned gas station miles outside of Baton Rouge, hiding among rusted pumps and weeds. Claire spread her equipment across the counter. Laptop, power bank, signal booster, and the flash drive. The air reeked of old gasoline and fear. "This is it," she said quietly. "If we upload the footage, it'll go straight to 10 independent networks. Whistleblower boards, encrypted archives, even the public web. Once it's out there, they can't bury it." Echo connected the drive. "Just keep it steady. The files are encrypted under multiple layers. I'll decode them as we go." Derrick stood near the door, keeping watch. He couldn't shake what he'd seen, Marcus and the others walking like shadows, the hollow look in their eyes. It wasn't prison anymore. It was something else, something no law could justify. Claire began the upload. Progress bar, 1%, 4%, 12%. But then, the screen flickered. The laptop froze, then rebooted itself with a loud click. "What the?" she muttered. Lines of text flooded the screen. "Access terminated, FCTD oversight protocol." Echo's eyes went wide. "They found us already? That's impossible." He ripped out the flash drive. Smoke hissed from the port. "It's fried." They sent a reverse trace through the signal. Derrick slammed his fist against the wall. "So they killed the upload remotely?" Echo nodded grimly. "They anticipated this. The moment we connected, their defense system recognized the encryption key. Everything on that drive is gone." Claire's voice cracked. "That was our only proof." Echo shook his head. "Not quite. I still have fragments stored on my offline server, files that weren't linked to the drive. But to access them, I need a secure connection. And the only working uplink in this region belongs to, he hesitated, the Baton Rouge field office of the Department of Corrections. Derrick frowned. You're saying we break into their system now? Echo gave a tired smile. You already broke into a secret underground lab. What's a government office compared to that? They didn't have time to argue. By nightfall, they were back on the road, a different car this time, an old police interceptor Echo had borrowed from a scrapyard. Every few miles, Derrick checked the rearview mirror. SUVs, headlights off, followed from a distance, then disappeared. Whoever they were tracking, not attacking, waiting for the right time. The Baton Rouge DOC office sat behind 2 security fences, quiet after hours. Claire and Echo worked fast, cutting power to the motion sensors and sneaking in through the side entrance. Inside, the air was cold and dry. Rows of computers hummed under fluorescent light. Echo plugged in a portable terminal. Once I connect, we'll have 5 minutes before they trace the intrusion. He accessed the internal server, screen after screen of classified folders, project codes, and encrypted memos. Then he found it, Division 9, Facility 12/Cognitive Program Oversight. Claire leaned over his shoulder. That's it. Open it. The folder expanded, revealing files labeled Medical Log 001082, Project Directive, Phase 3, and Asset Reassignment List. She clicked one at random. The screen filled with photos, inmates, test notes, brain scan data, and progress reports. Under each photo, subject's emotional response successfully suppressed. Retention level 92%. Then, near the bottom, another document, External Funding FCTD/Federal Correctional Technologies Division. Derrick squinted. Who's signing those payments? Echo zoomed in and froze. At the bottom was a name. Not a corporation. A person. Frank Dillard, Warden, Louisiana State Penitentiary. Derrick's jaw clenched. He signed the transfers himself. He knew. All of it. Claire's voice trembled. He was never transferring them out. He was selling them. Before they could process it, the lights flickered. Then the intercom crackled. Unauthorized access detected. Level 3 lockdown initiated. Echo grabbed the terminal. We've been flagged, copying now. The alarms blared, red lights flashing across the walls. Armed security rushed into the hallway. Derrick stepped in front of Claire. Go. Get the files out. They ran through the emergency exit, gunfire echoing behind them. Echo dove into the car, starting the engine as Claire and Derrick leapt in. The tires screeched as they tore out of the lot, sirens fading behind them. Inside the car, Echo looked down at his laptop. Got it? We have full data. Claire exhaled in disbelief. We did it, we actually did it. But before anyone could celebrate, the GPS flickered, the same way it had when their last upload failed. The laptop froze again, this time showing a single message across the screen. Property of Division 9. Return immediately. Then, one by one, the files began to delete themselves. Echo tried to disconnect, but it was too late. The laptop powered off, smoke rising from the vents. Every bit of evidence, gone again. Claire buried her face in her hands. It's like they're everywhere, even inside our tech. Derrick stared straight ahead. They're not trying to erase us, he said quietly. They're trying to contain us, like the inmates. Echo turned slowly. Then we do this the old-fashioned way. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small, battered camcorder. This thing isn't digital. No chips, no trackers. You tell your story, Lawson. The whole truth. On tape. Derrick hesitated. And then what? Claire looked at him, tired, but burning with resolve. We find a way to make the world listen. Outside, the night stretched endlessly ahead of them. Silent highways, flickering streetlights, and the distant hum of a world that had no idea what was happening beneath its feet. And somewhere, far behind them, the lights of Facility 12 blinked once, and went dark. The broadcast. The motel was quiet except for the hum of an old generator and the faint whir of a camcorder recording light. Derrick sat in front of it, hands folded, face pale under the dim yellow lamp. Claire adjusted the focus while Echo paced near the door, his eyes on the parking lot. They knew the clock was ticking. Every minute they stayed put increased the risk of being found. "Okay," Claire said softly, "we're live. Just speak like you're talking to the people watching this on their phones, like they're right in front of you." Derrick nodded slowly. His voice cracked at first but steadied as he began. "My name is Derrick Lawson. I served 17 years as a corrections officer at the Louisiana State Penitentiary, Angola. On the night of August 19th, I witnessed something that shouldn't exist. Death row inmates were transferred out of Angola under orders that came with no signatures, no records, and no explanation. I followed those transfers. They didn't go to another prison. They went underground, to a place called Facility 12. He took a shaky breath. Facility 12 isn't on any map. It doesn't appear in any government directory. But I've seen it. I've been inside. The men who were sent there, they're still alive. They're being used. Controlled. What's happening there isn't rehabilitation. It's experimentation." Claire's camera zoomed in. His voice grew heavier. "They're using people, human beings, to test neural control programs designed to erase emotion, thought, and will. I've seen the machines. I've seen what they do. And if you're watching this, you need to know, they plan to expand. Facility 13 is already being built." He stopped, looked straight at the lens. "These aren't just prisoners anymore. They're victims of a system that decided their lives didn't matter. Please, don't let them disappear." Claire stopped recording. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence felt like a verdict. Echo unplugged the camcorder and began transferring the footage to 3 separate drives. "No network this time," he said. "We hand-deliver each copy to independent contacts, journalists, lawyers, maybe even an international human rights board." Claire nodded. "We scatter it. Even if they catch one of us, the others can still get the truth out." They packed fast. Within minutes, they were back on the road, Echo driving, Claire navigating, Derrick silent in the back seat. Rain began to fall again, washing the windshield in streaks of silver. Halfway down the highway, Claire's phone buzzed. A known number. A single text message. "We already have the tape." Her hands went cold. She showed it to Echo. He looked at it, then at the rearview mirror. A black SUV had been following them for the past 5 miles. Same one from Baton Rouge. He hit the accelerator. "Hold on." The engine roared as the SUV sped up behind them. Headlights flashed once, then again. A warning. Echo swerved off the main road, tires spraying mud. They tore through a service path between the cane fields, the car bouncing violently. The SUV stayed close, matching every turn. Claire shouted, "They're not trying to stop us, they're hurting us." Ahead, the dirt road ended at an old drawbridge over the bayou. Rust, rain, and a whole lot of bad luck. Echo slammed the brakes. End of the line. The SUV stopped 20 yards behind them. Doors opened. 3 men stepped out, dressed in black, no insignias. One held a small device blinking blue, a signal tracker. Derrick whispered, "They tracked the camera." Before anyone could move, a voice called out through a megaphone, calm, almost polite. "Officer Lawson, Claire Henderson, you're in possession of state property. Surrender the footage and no one gets hurt." Echo whispered, "They don't want us, they want the tape." He reached into his jacket and pulled out the camcorder. Then, without hesitation, he tossed it to Derrick. "Run," he said. "What?" "Run. You're the one who saw it. You're the one who can tell them." Before Derrick could argue, Echo turned, fired a flare gun toward the SUV, and the night exploded in light. Gunfire erupted. Claire screamed, ducking behind the car. Derrick bolted across the bridge, the camcorder clutched tight against his chest. Behind him, Echo's voice echoed once through the chaos. "Tell them what they did." Then, silence. The explosion lit up the bayou, reflecting orange over the water. When Derrick finally looked back, the bridge was gone. So was Echo. Only smoke. He stumbled into the darkness, heart pounding, rain soaking through his clothes. He didn't know where to go, only that he had to keep the tape safe. By dawn, He reached a small rural post office. Claire, bruised but alive, met him there. Together, they sealed the footage in a plain box addressed to 10 locations: news stations, law offices, advocacy groups. No names. No return address. Just one phrase written across the label in black marker. Inside Louisiana Death Row, the truth. They watched the clerk stamp it and slide it into the outgoing bin. It was done. But as they stepped outside, a radio crackled from a passing police cruiser. A voice spoke clearly over the static. Be advised, Lawson and Henderson, fugitives wanted for breach of national security. Proceed with caution. Claire looked at him. He looked back. Neither said a word. They just walked. And somewhere behind them, buried deep under the Louisiana swamps, Facility 12 powered back on. A new file opened on a government terminal. Project continuation. Facility 13, operational phase pending. The screen flickered. Then the final line appeared. Subjects secured. Lawson classified as asset priority. The silence beneath the swamp. In the end, it wasn't the headlines or the protests that told the story. It was the silence beneath the swamp, beneath the walls, beneath the words, for the safety of the public. Facility 12 was never supposed to exist. It wasn't on the map. It wasn't in the books. But the men who vanished there, they were real. They had names. They had families. They had voices that were taken from them in the name of control. Derrick Lawson gave up everything. His career, his safety, his freedom, just to prove that truth still mattered. Claire Henderson risked her life to make sure the world would hear it. And Echo, the ghost who lived inside the system, chose to burn it from the inside out. The files they sent out that morning didn't just expose one prison. They exposed an idea that once the system decides a man is no longer worth saving, it can do anything to him and call it justice. But justice isn't silence. Justice is light. And even in the darkest places, buried deep under Louisiana mud and metal, light finds a way to break through. So the next time you drive past an empty field, or see a fence where no one's allowed to go, remember, the truth doesn't vanish just because someone erased the map. It waits, patient, unblinking, for someone brave enough to dig it up. And as for the story of Facility 12, it's not over. Because truth, like the swamp, always rises to the surface.